Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the humble beginnings of yet another massive undertaking. This time around we will be sculpting a 3/4 life-size full figure, and as always I'll start off with a maquette. First off, if you'd like to support me and my YouTube channel, check out my Patreon page. This especially applies to you if you're interested in learning about sculpture and getting feedback on your own work, and that is what the Patreon page first and foremost aims to do. But if you're interested in just showing some support and help me create better and more content, that works too, of course. As always, there's a link in the description below. One of the things you can get for lending your support is this very sculpture that I'll make in today's video. So if that sounds interesting, take a look. As you saw in the beginning of this video, I'm using a different clay than usual. My usual clay, and the one I'll make the big version out of, is Terra Rossa di Montelupo, which I have a video on that you can check out. There's a link in the top right corner. This clay, however, is Chavant Le Beau Touché, and it's an oil-based clay. So, why am I using an oil-based clay, you ask? Well, because it never dries out. Oil-based clay does not need to be maintained at all, and therefore it's great for smaller scale work. In fact, I used to work exclusively in oil-based clay before I came to Florence, and it's great if you're working out of your bedroom, on a small bench. It doesn't need to be wrapped up, there's no dust from it, and it's an all-around very good clay to work with. The only problem is that it is very hard compared to water-based clay, and so you can see me using one of the school's ceramic heaters to heat it up and soften it. Now you can use a lamp too, of course, or something similar as well, but I have a big nice heater for the models, so I might as well use it, right? For large-scale work, I find this clay too slow and hard, and it's very expensive compared to water-based clays as well, so I'll stick with water-based clay for larger scale work, where water-based clay is pretty easy to manage. But in these smaller scales, water-based clay would just dry out really quickly, so oil-based clay is perfect. When making this sculpture, I'm not using a model. I had the model come in and we worked out the pose, and then I made the sculpture from imagination, what I remembered of the model. And I had the pose kind of worked out in my head as well beforehand. Part of the reason for making a small maquette is that you can work out so many of the design issues in a smaller scale that's easier to manipulate and change. And you'll kind of see me do that in this video. I'll start over, I'll start with one pose, and later in the video you'll see me make adjustments to it and change it, which exemplifies very well, I think, why I make the maquette. So I'm not using a model because I'm not really aiming for accuracy, and it's not a sculpture that I'll measure from and scale up to my 3/4 life-size sculpture. This is just a piece unto itself, so accuracy is not that important. What is important is the mood and how the pose feels and moves. A lot of what I was able to find here and the choices that I made here, my model is not really going to be able to give me for extended periods of time. But because I made this, I now know where to make adjustments and deviate from my model. So it's not an accurate map with a trail that I'll follow exactly, it's more of a general direction that I set for myself. I think this scale and this style of making sculptures is something that I'd like to get back to a little bit more. This is all that I used to do in my bedroom at home before I came to Florence. And it was something that I really enjoyed. It was a hobby at that point, you know. I came home from work or school and I sat down and I made these small scale sculptures. And I really looked forward to having the time to make them. And so I really want to get back to doing it a little bit and explore ideas and poses in this scale, and then choose the ones that I think are the most successful and invest in model time, in casting supplies, in clay, in armatures, and make bigger sculptures out of the ones that I really like. This scale is also a lot more affordable for most people, people who want to buy art, and it fits in more people's home. You know, it's not like a 3/4 life-size sculpture can go in most people's home, and definitely not in anybody's apartment. Now this doesn't really mean that I'm, trying to create something that's going to be easy to sell. I'll probably still create weird sculptures of real life men, mostly, who's lived and whose body shows the fact that they have lived, because that's what I'm really interested in. Maybe I'll make a woman again one day, but we'll see. By the way, as you might have noticed, I won't be talking too much about what I'm actually doing here, and these maquette videos, which I aim to do more of, will never be like that, I think. They will be videos where I talk about other things, almost like a brainstorming session and a little peek into my internal dialogue, let's say. So hopefully you enjoyed that. Everything sculpting wise, I think it will be easier to show and it will be more thoroughly covered in the longer videos on the bigger projects. In these videos you can watch and decipher what's going on, I think, more or less, while I ramble on about things related to sculpture, not the specific sculpture at hand. So with that in mind, let's talk about the armature a little bit first. The armature here is a wooden board and plumber's piping. The figure itself is suspended from the top of the plumber's piping, and it's made up out of aluminum armature wire. Just like the same stuff that I use in larger scale figures, but thinner, obviously. And this is the first time I've tried suspending the armature from the top through the head like this, and it works well. They used to do it a lot in the crochet class here at Florence Academy, so that's where I saw it first. And as I do more of these videos, I'll explore other options and show you other ways to create solutions to your armature problems, because a lot of people seem to be having issues with making armatures. Now, they all come with compromises. And the good part about this armature is that I have the freedom to extend the work upwards to a certain extent and downwards. Imagine if I mounted the sculpture through the feet. I'd have a limit to how far down I could extend my figure. Here the feet are also not attached to anything, which means they can be moved easily into whatever pose I choose, so it's very flexible. And working in a flexible way is something you'll probably hear and probably hopefully have, heard me talk about a lot, and it's a major point in how I approach my work. You probably also saw that my aluminum wire was wrapped with thinner wire, and the reason for this is that it gives the clay something to grab onto. It helps the clay hold onto the armature, and it won't slip off as easily. One of the main reasons I want to get back to more often working in this scale is the speed at which I can work. Now, this piece took about 5-6 hours to complete, and there was barely any model cost. So it's a lot faster and cheaper than spending months, which is what I prefer to do on my bigger piece. Small scale figures and working fast give the smaller pieces something the bigger pieces lack, I think. The smaller pieces have something different to them. Now, it's the other way around too, of course, I think. The smaller pieces lack something the bigger pieces have, which is why it is so much fun for me. They are very different. And the approach is very different as well, which is exciting for me. I love not affording myself the time to worry about details like the face, toes, and hands, for example. The surface ends up looser and fresher, and it's all taken just as far as I need it to go for the idea to be communicated. Bigger scales afford me the opportunity to be more technically sound, to be more careful with surface and modeling, adding more details, and it actually, to me at least, feels like the bigger scale demands that amount of craftsmanship and attention from me. But in smaller scales, I can't really get into all those details, and so it becomes about the big impression almost exclusively, and I enjoy that a lot. I probably enjoy it so much because it is very fresh compared to how I normally approach sculpture and how technical the work tends to get in the bigger scales. Okay, let's talk about what this figure is, or what it is going to be at least. Keep in mind that I reserve the right to change my opinion on this as time goes on. I don't see my work as static, I see it as alive. And this means, or probably mean, that the meaning or the ideas behind the work will change. Now, what it means to you might differ entirely, and I encourage everyone to have their own interpretation. That's kind of the exciting part, I think. But anyway, here's what I think. The Pythagorean, I'm not really sure. The Pythagorean theorem, also known as Pythagoras' theorem, is a fundamental relation in Euclidean geometry amongst the three sides of a right triangle. And it states that the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the square of the two other sides. And it's a fundamental principle in mathematics, and hopefully one of those principles that applies to all of the universe. Now, if you're a scientist, you'll probably say, of course it applies, but who knows? There's a lot of things we don't know, I think. And because it is so fundamental in mathematics, it should, or at least theoretically could, be used for communication with a different species. If they are intelligent, if that species is intelligent and are aware of mathematics, that is. Which they should be if they're capable of space travel and coming to Earth. Instead of releasing a dove like they did in Mars Attack and seriously jeopardizing our relationship with the aliens, this way of greeting would indicate our knowledge of mathematics. So, in a way, this sculpture is a welcoming gesture to our new alien overlords. A way to make contact. Now, I'm joking, but I'm being somewhat serious as well. The idea of beings or gods outside our own existence is very interesting to me, and communicating with God or other beings through prayer is something I wanted this sculpture to touch on as well, without being overly religious in its form. It's kind of a non-religious sculpture about something religious, let's say. Prayer on the fundamental psychological level is the act of asking a question. And by asking that question to God, we hope to receive an answer. Ask and you shall receive, right? But there's something else going on there. By asking the question, by finding the words to describe what you wish for, or what you want, or what you hope will happen, you will make it clear to yourself because you worded it. You put it into reality. You spoke it into the real world. And you'll make it very clear to yourself when you do that what needs to be done in order to answer said question. So, finding the answer without having worded the question is something that's very hard. If you don't know what question you're trying to answer, answering it is impossible. So once you know the question you're asking, finding the answer becomes very achievable. And I find this so interesting because Rob Bowden used to tell me, and tell all of us, and he probably still tells his students, that every piece of clay you put on your sculpture should be an answer to a question observed from a distance. And so, what I'm trying to teach people is not what the answer is. That's impossible to teach because there are too many questions to ask. What I'm trying to teach people is how to ask the right question. Once you know how to do that, then you'll always find the answer. Ask and you shall receive. And so, this sculpture has a little bit of humor and inside joke behind it, at least to me, because in one way, it's a sculpture about the way I was taught and teach how to sculpt, which is interesting, a sculpture about how to sculpt. I don't know, I find that somewhat humorous at least. In addition to all that, the sculpture is also about asking for help from something outside yourself. Prayer is often asking for help or for the strength to complete a task. And so it's not only humor and inside jokes that made me make this piece. More often than not, I'd say, there is something very serious and sometimes dark lurking behind every piece that I make. Though this piece is definitely on the lighter, more positive side of things for me. A kind of reaching for the stars metaphor, if you will, aiming upward, asking what must be done and then going out and doing it. So by now, I'm sure you can tell that there are many different ideas behind this piece of work, many angles that I approached it from, and many angles you can approach it from. And I'm sure I'm forgetting something, and a lot of how I think about my work slowly becomes clear to me as I progress through the work. It's like working on something that's slightly outside of what you understand or know, and then slowly gaining more knowledge as you put in the hours. And this is partly what I love about taking forever to complete a piece, because the longer I work on a piece, the more I discover about the ideas behind the piece itself. I also enjoy drawing inspiration from somewhat obscure sources of pop culture, and this piece is no exception. And if you don't recognize where this is from, I'm sure the comment section can help you out, hopefully. Inspiration, as far as poses go, it's less about meaning here and more about imagery. An example could be like how a painter would use works from the past to inspire him when composing an image. But instead of the past, I often get inspired by contemporary imagery. I don't intend for my sculptures to be merely an homage to whatever pop culture reference I've drawn inspiration from. That's very important to know. It's more about giving little hints or clues about the entertainment landscape that I inhabit. I find leaving those little nuggets of hidden information a lot of fun and very interesting. It's like clues about our time and our world that will be missed by most people, but I know that they're there, and I find that very enjoyable. There's a lot of talk about upholding tradition at the academy, at the Florence Academy where I work, and the style I work in is obviously drenched in history. But I just can't help but think that there can be a little bit more than just looking back, and perhaps there even should be more. I'd say probably certainly should be more. And that putting our own spin on things, representing our time, however subtly you choose to do so, I think that's a valid choice as well. One leg planted in what we know, which is tradition and the past, while one leg reaches out asking questions and searches for the answer. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, I encourage you to check out my Patreon page to lend your support to the channel. If you'd like to learn directly from me, then the Patreon page is the place to go. I give feedback and critiques on people's work, and we talk about tools, techniques, sculpting, mold making, casting, whatever you need help with in your sculpting endeavors. There are several tiers, which gives an array of rewards, one of them being this very sculpture. So, check it out, and I'm sure you'll find something for you. The link is in the description below. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the beginning of the 3/4 scale version of this sculpture, coming very soon. Subscribe and hit the bell to be notified whenever a new video comes out. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and share it with your friends and family. It helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, stay creative, and I hope to see you in the next one.